Ahoy, you salty sailors. Time to raise anchor and set sail for your best scrawny life. Arrgh.
Alright, our species spotlight for this episode is Platanus occidentalis, the American sycamore. Here's a quick look at the leaf and the seed head, I guess you could say it. I think these little little furry seeds that come out of that ball are called achenes, if I remember right. This is one of the trees that associates with morel mushrooms, but it's quite rare to find morels growing around one, just because these trees can live for a very long time. They are fairly easy to distinguish from other trees, even before the leaves come out. And that's because their bark is quite distinctive. It has this patchy, whitish look as you go upward. Now, the biggest American sycamore that ever grew in Iowa is a famous tree that has its own Facebook page now, called the Peace Tree. It's an enormous American sycamore that grew in the Des Moines River Valley, where Lake Red Rock is now. It was an enormous tree and centuries old. In the mid-1800s, there was a line between the Red Rock area and Steamboat Rock, and that line was part of a border. It was called the Red Rock Line. It was part of a border between the area, the white settlers, and the Native Americans. And apparently the Peace Tree was close enough to this line that the settlers and the Native Americans would meet there. As you know, it was an enormous tree, so it was a easily recognizable landmark. Plus it was near the river, which may have been important for transportation. But anyway, they would set aside their hostilities, and there were hostilities between them off and on, but they would set aside their hostilities to trade underneath this tree, because they both benefited from the trade, both groups did, and so therefore it gained the name of the Peace Tree. Now I remember seeing the stump of this tree in the lake, but I didn't know the whole backstory behind it. So these are some of the signs that the DNR has put by the tree. You can pause the video and just kind of read through this. In the bottom paragraph there, it says the Peace Tree was not actually used as a landmark to mark the line itself, although the groups living in that area, the settlers and the Native Americans, did use it as a landmark. But the government did not, which is understandable because sycamores are valley trees. And the government used oaks. If they used a tree for a landmark, they were using oaks, which grow on ridge tops. I wanted to do a study, just a quick painting study, on in the 1800s, the trees they painted had a real specific sort of shape language. There was a certain construction method they were using to paint them. They used atmospheric perspective more than people use today. So in a lot of these old paintings, the trees just kind of fade into the background. But they also had this really unusual shape language to them too. So I'm going to just lay down some muted colors and just kind of blur those back. And then in the center of this shape, we're going to make a color movement where it grows darker, but also more saturated towards the center. Then we'll start kind of just roughing in the trunk, and then some of the branches what we laid down first are the branches that extend away from the viewer, and now we're putting in the branches and leaves that extend toward the viewer. So those have a higher contrast between the shadow and the highlight areas. But and trying to get that shape line, I don't quite have it. It was really unusual how they did their trees back then. But it was a great effect. It really had a unique look to it. I mean, if you see a painting with a tree that's painted like that, you know almost immediately that it's a really old painting. That's close. It's not quite like they did it, but it's in that ballpark. So we'll just add a few details and kind of bring this to life a little bit more here. See what it looks like. Slap in some branches and twigs and so forth. And now we'll just highlight. We'll just add a few details of the leaves and highlight and shadow in the foreground, on those foreground branches. Let's see what that looks like. It's close. It's not exactly how they did it. I might have to study some reference material here, but that's kind of how they did it. It had that atmospheric perspective to the whole thing. I mean, the whole background, made heavy use of atmospheric perspective. But the trees were just, they had a recognizable style that just belonged to that era. So it's late March. Some of the larger rivers are getting a walleye run going, but we've had enough rain, which we did need. We very much needed to muddy up the larger rivers quite a bit. So I went out to the Middle Raccoon. This is Hanging Rock Park in Redfield. Now, fly fishing for walleye is basically a waste of time, but or let's put it this way, basically it's a way to enjoy a nice day, but your chances of catching a walleye with this method are quite low. I have done it. It's not impossible, but I mean, it's certainly not the best way to catch these fish. So mostly I was just messing around with the drone and learning a little bit more about it, and taking advantage of the nice day, the nice weather. So I did not catch a fish, which isn't surprising. So I've edited the footage down to just the casting for those in the audience who are interested in microskagit casting. You can have a look at that. So I fished this little pool here, and then went on to the other side of the river and went up by where the old collapsed bridge is. There's a trail there. I went up that trail and down into kind of the lower part of the other part of Hanging Rock Park, and fished a little bend that was a rocky little bend that's down there. Didn't get a fish down there. So I came back through this same trail, and as I did, when I got to this point where you see this white arrow, I fell down and fractured my number 1 lumbar vertebra, and it was quite painful. As the trail cuts down into the riverbank, there's some sandstone. I mean, you can see there's sandstone all over this whole area, but it's the kind of sandstone that's not real firm. It's kind of powdery a little bit, and I was I think I remember thinking to myself that maybe I shouldn't trust that with my full weight, but I didn't want to. I had, the drone case and a fishing rod in my hand and stuff. I didn't want to set that stuff down, so I just went down it forward, and I believe it just kind of gave way underfoot, and down I went, and I landed just in just such a way that it fractured that vertebra, and it was very painful. I yelled out. There were people. I could see people on the main part of the park on the other side of the river, looking at me as I'm laying on the ground over there. But they couldn't, they didn't have full chest waders on like I did. They couldn't come over to the side where I was. But eventually I did get up and make it back across the river and drove down to the ER. So this may be the last video that I put out for a while. I don't know, at least doing things like fishing and, outdoor activities. We'll see. I have to be x-rayed again by the neurosurgical team in a month to see whether they want to do surgery or not, and we'll just kind of take it from there. So you'll recall in the last episode we cooked up some of the bone-in strips from that silver carp, and I froze the boneless strips, but in this episode we're going to thaw some of those out and fry them up. And this is the one bag method that probably almost everybody knows. And basically the first layer of flour sticks to the fish, and that helps the batter sticks to that flour. And then after you do your batter, if you shake up the batter, then you put another round of flour in there and shake that up. And basically that flour sticks to the batter and forms these craggy little surfaces that'll get crunchy when you fry them up. Really tasty. One of the best fish here in Iowa, actually. I'd say, of course, walleye is number one. I would put freshwater drum as number 2. And I would say silver and bighead carp are number 3, along with, in the same group as, say, like crappie and things like that. So here's a look at my first ever drone flight. I went out to Red Rock after I got the drone and just flew it around real briefly, just learning the buttons and the controls and the interface and so forth. So it's been 5 days as I'm recording this since the accident, and well, it's painful to sit in front of the computer for too long, and it's painful to stand, and it's painful to walk, and it feels good to lie down, but I haven't been able to sit up in bed without yelling out in pain since that happened. So I was sitting at home, cooped up indoors now for 5 days, and quite frankly, was pretty down in the dumps about the whole situation, but the weather was nice today. It got up into the 60s, or at least the upper 50s. So I decided to go outside. I went out to Thomas Mitchell Park, and I've been using a cane in the house here, but I have a big walking stick that I keep in my garage, so I took that walking stick out there and hiked a little ways up the trail. I found a log that had some chlorosiboria staining on it, and I did throw my 3-weight rod in the back of the car, and on the corner of the pond there, I saw a big cloud of midges hovering over the pond, so I thought, well, there's got to be some bluegill down there. So I strung that up and right away caught some small bluegill. Now, it's a small pond, so it's full of just stunning little bluegill. But not my biggest catch ever, but psychologically it really helped.